redelijke midden. Het redelijke midden. De podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Het Redelijke Midden, normally a Dutch language leftist podcast, and the title about roughly translates to the moderate or respectable or reasonable center. Meme lords would likely think that, we're talking about the enlightened center, and the name is both a joke and is not. We genuinely believe that a reasonable and proportional response to contemporary politics begins with anti-capitalism. The reason we wanted to make a podcast today in English for a change is that three of our hosts actually, and usually, reside abroad, two of them in the United States and one of them in Germany. And today's topic is going to be a general analysis of the Dutch parliamentary elections that were held last week. And it might be of broader interest to our international friends who have occasionally asked, when can I listen to your podcast? So this is one of the reasons. There might be some misconceptions about the perceived Dutch progressivism that we would love to correct in this episode. In fact, it might surprise some of you because the Netherlands has generally a very respectable image abroad. However, Dutch politics is far more reactionary and conservative than you might think, and as indicated by the massive electoral victories last week of far-right parties in parliament, there is something amiss in this country. And we would love to talk you through that, talk about the great loss of leftist political parties, their historic defeat, in fact, and some other themes. So without further ado, I would love to introduce to you Annelot.
Hi, I'm Annelot Prins, and I'm doing a PhD at the Free University here in Berlin on social justice in popular music.
Next, we have Farah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Farah, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate at Stanford University working on early modern global history. And I'm thematically very much interested in environmental thought, race, and indigeneity in the Ottoman world, Morocco, Iberia, and the Americas in the 16th and 17th century.
We have also Pim.
Hi, I'm Pim van den Berg. I'm a Dutch pop culture critic who focuses on video games and digital culture, and particularly the intersections between those and masculinity.
And my name is Thijs, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Government at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and my work focuses on 20th century liberalism, Cold War liberalism, and particularly the work of Isaiah Berlin. Right. Where do we start?
Well, with the results, I think, because for many of us, it has been quite the depressing evening last Wednesday when the results came in, and it became evidently clear that, well, not only did the far right increase their presence in parliament, but the neoliberal status quo parties like the VVD, the mainstream neoliberal party headed by our Prime Minister Mark Rutte, well, they kept their seats, even increased their seats, despite the entire issue with the
You're looking for the word for toeslagenaffaire. It was a great scandal where the Dutch basically the Dutch IRS, right, the tax agency, the tax collecting agency, had targeted individual parents, accusing them of fraud with this child benefit, and it had particularly targeted them on the basis of ethnic profiling, and the tax agency has destroyed literally several thousands of people's lives by a years-long campaign to accuse them of fraud, get all the money back, finding them with huge.
I think it's also important to stress here that it was not solely the racist child welfare scandal. Because our Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, was also convicted for, ethnically profiling, specifically Dutch Somalis back in 2007, when he was the Secretary of State for Social Services. But it appears that, despite all these events that happened and Rutte and his party's involvement in that, they were not punished for it in the elections at all, because they, still were able to make it as the largest party.
So I think we now made it very clear that we are quite shocked and very disappointed with the fact that they grew and they won. But I think actually to like, for other people living abroad in different systems electorally, I think it's very important to, first of all, emphasize that we have the most proportional electoral system in the world. So that means that in our country, your vote really does count and you have a lot of different parties to choose from. For this election, I think we had 41 parties running. I hope that I'm correct. And if not, that you would like
it was in the 40s.
Yeah. So there is a lot of there are a lot of different parties to choose from. And ultimately, all of these parties have to figure out a way to work together in parliament. So we have 150 seats in parliament that are divided over different parties that gain votes. But the proportionality of it means that you only need 0.67% of votes to win a seat in our parliament. So that means that, yeah, your vote matters, and that you can also see in the turnout. So turnout this year was 79%. The last elections in 2017, it was 81.4%, and that is extremely high. And yeah, I think this is like the one thing that I do like about the Netherlands.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the other hand, it means that all parties will have to find ways to work together, which means we call it polderen, that you always have to create consensus and compromise.
But it is also important, I think, despite what Anne-Lotte was saying, I mean, obviously, it's a proportional electoral system, and in theory, it seems to be possible for, different parties to participate in elections. But also, if we look at what concretely happened over the past 20 years or so, it is actually quite difficult to get into parliament. And I think since 20 years, only 8 new parties made it into parliament.
Yeah.
And more interestingly, all those political parties, or majority of them, were actually radical and far right. So, in theory, this sort of system seems to be, quite hopeful and quite progressive, but the outcomes of it, unfortunately, have not been so.
So we do actually have, I think, the most parties newly in Parliament now since pretty much the opening of the franchise to all voting men in like 1918-ish. This is a statistic I'm quoting from memory of having read it in the last few days, but we can add this to the show notes. But the big winner, as mentioned before, the VVD, the current ruling party, a neoliberal conservative party, not unlike the Tories in the United Kingdom. Then the second big winner are the Liberal Democrats, D66, a nominally progressive, but in fact mostly neoliberal party that also gained seats, and that was part of the governing coalition in the last 4 years. Other big winners were far-right parties. We got some new parties, JA 21, JA 21. There is the FVD, the party of Thierry Baudet, who was only in December roiled by a huge anti-Semitism scandal where it was revealed that pretty much their entire party is rife with it, and yet they jumped from 2 to 8 seats in this election.
Yeah, it's important to note that Baudet is the preeminent fascist in Dutch politics.
That's right. And there is, of course, Geert Wilders' party that might be familiar to some abroad, the guy with the weird hair, who lost, I think, 2 or 3 seats, but remained pretty much stable around 20 seats. I think he currently has 17. The Christian Democrats lost some seats, but really the huge losses are on the left. The Socialist Party lost 5 seats. The Green Party lost, I think, 6 or 7 seats. The Labour Party was small and remained small. And the overall share of left-wing parties that you can properly call leftist parties, including the Green Party, the Social Democrats, is about roughly the same size as the whole vote share of the far right and extreme right in the Netherlands. And
what's particular is that the shift from leftist parties to the other parties hasn't been as predictable as you might expect.
Yeah, so what's really interesting about these elections is the movements from in between these parties, because we lost a bunch of voters for example, the Socialist Party, but also the Party for Animal Rights, which is a party that our system has space for too, to extreme right parties like the aforementioned Thierry Baudet Party for Democratie, but also Ja 21. And that might seem quite shocking, but might not be as shocking in the end, because what we've seen in the Netherlands now for a very long time is a very strong conservative government that is doing a lot of austerity politics for a long time now, even though that's very ill-advised from basically every single economist in the world. But yeah, they keep taking money out of healthcare, education, etc. And what we see on the left there is that a lot of left-wing parties have moved kind of more towards these neoliberal austerity policies and try to compromise there instead of offering alternatives. And what the extreme right does very well is then basically blame a bunch of people for economic hardship in a way that gets very tangible, and the left just doesn't.
Well, how is the, Thijs, perhaps you have an explanation for this. How is the landslide victory for the right? How can you explain that? I mean, people's lives haven't exactly gotten better under their rule for the past decade.
No, and this is one of the big paradoxes actually in Dutch politics. You know, the fact of the matter is that a lot of Dutch voters are, when you ask them not about their voting preference, right, not about their allegiance to some political party, but if you ask them and poll them about their policy preferences, they are by and large left of center and to the left. They want nice things, and they want nice things for themselves. And they are far more, quote unquote, progressive than their voting habits seems to suggest. However,
with nice things, do you mean like a clean environment, childcare, healthcare,
fair labor practices, raising the minimum wage, good quality healthcare, affordable housing, both for the rental market as well as for buying a house. So all of the things that have gone worse over the past decade under Mark Rutte's leadership, because housing prices have exploded. It's almost impossible to find a suitable rental home. The number of unhoused people has doubled and exploded. Wages have stagnated. There's a host of things that, if you look at them sort of rationally, you would find it hard to explain why the Dutch electorate is not responding to this more critically. So this is I think this is a genuine conundrum, right, that needs to be explained. Why do Dutch voters vote parties that are on the right that do not actually want to solve any of these problems and that tend not to solve these problems, even though their stated policy preferences are mostly to the left? We might look at several different explanations for them. I think one of these is the Dutch media landscape, right? What kind of problems, what kind of public debate gets amplified as being all important, right? This is the major topic. This is what it's about. Secondly, there is the phenomenon that, especially during COVID, many of these right-wing parties have sort of assumed the posture of now also being in favor of a robust and more interventionist government. So the genuine difference between the left and right when it comes to an interventionist government has diminished somewhat.
Yeah.
I think there is I think the left is bad at politics, genuinely. So we should, I think, discuss all of those things. But I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is there's this old Dutch political tradition of poldering.
Poldering, or as we in Dutch would say, polderen, means figuring out things together and ending up in the reasonable center of these things, compromising constantly in a way that all parties can find something in the agreement that they can live with. And that obviously, in a way, is nice, you know? That's kind of the idea of democracy.
It sounds good in principle, yeah.
Exactly. On the other hand, that means that you will never have complete renewal or really innovative or visionary changes or ideas as often as you would maybe want to. Like, you would never be able to do that, even though the situation and context might change and demand more radical change or more radical differences from earlier policies and politics. So what you then get is something that ends up way more conservative than other people think that we are, because also our self-image is still that we're very progressive and a very visionary a country when it comes to politics, which is simply not true, unfortunately. It's very interesting how that self-image was kind of solidified when we ratified gay marriage, I would say, which was late 80s, I want to say. Yeah. I hope that's correct. And that kind of, for us, formed proof of like, oh, look at us being progressive and really great. And we kind of stopped there. And still use that and our euthanasia laws to claim that we're a very progressive country in which a lot of things are possible, even though the reality shows that that's absolutely no longer the case and we're behind on a lot of things compared to a lot of other countries.
The International Court in The Hague might have also contributed to that image.
Also, our weed policies, like that's obviously, as someone living abroad, is the first
a classical
like
one.
A few things that people think about when you're Dutch is drugs and the red light district in Amsterdam, euthanasia. Like I remember when I first went to the US that a lot of old people were very afraid of the Dutch because they think we'll kill our old people at some point. And there's very big fear of that. They think gay rights are great in the Netherlands, which is not true because a lot of homophobia and violence against gay people is on the rise, actually, very steadily. We have a lot of problems with that we are then in this great paradox of Dutch culture not facing because we are so invested in that self-image of being this progressive, liberated country.
Yeah. And also the red light district is a heavy target for gentrification.
Yes.
One of the other reasons I think that the left has made such a the left has received such a clobbering was another thing, and that is that the Dutch media landscape is quite of a kind of a strange phenomenon, I think, especially if you want to understand this from the perspective of other countries. I think its closest analog might be the Dutch BBC. So there is a large chunk of the Dutch media segment that is basically a BBC model where the government funds these news media, particularly the online or the TV news media, right? The news shows, the talk shows, the late night discussion shows have, and this is we'll share the statistics in the show notes, have an obsession with the far right. Right, the far right receives in the Netherlands outsized attention, and not merely in being talked about, being reported on, but particularly also being invited to the talk shows to explain their positions, to discuss their agenda, etc., in a remarkably uncritical and friendly way. So, and we have the numbers here. We'll share those in the show notes. But if you extrapolate the number of seats that far-right parties had, right, in Parliament, so before this election, and you compare that with, how much would you expect people to be on TV based on how proportional that seems to their vote share and to their share of actual seats. The far right far, far, far outnumbers candidates from the left, also very frequently women politicians. So there's a lot of men, there's a lot of far right men, there's far fewer women, and there's far fewer candidates from the left on TV. And this is a clear bias that Dutch public broadcasting has, which is still one of the largest purveyors of news and backgrounds and talk shows and information on Dutch TV, which reaches quite a significant audience. And so you can imagine that in terms of agenda setting, right? What is the conversation of the day about? What is the national conversation about? This has a huge impact. The left cannot really set the agenda in the Netherlands because it's not at the TV shows, or at least far less frequently.
I totally agree with that, Thijs. And I also think what is important to stress as well in this discussion is that, you know, in this whole process of agenda setting by the Dutch media and the talk shows, etc., one of the most important trends you see is that, you know, a classical discussion that is very important for left-wing parties is, of course, you know, social economic developments, and specifically, you know, addressing class issues, etc., which is a topic and a discourse that you don't quite often see, you know, addressed or reified in Dutch media in general. Moreover, I think that the shift has primarily been to address other types of issues, which has to do primarily with, you know, cultural politics and cultural discourses that are, you know, trying to find solutions for problems that we have nowadays in this country, primarily based on, you know, reproducing discourses around anti-immigrant sentiments, Islamophobia, racism, etc., which in these talk shows receive a lot of attention, and often, you know, with very uncritical journalists that don't, you know, don't dare or even are not, you know, well informed to sort of provide an answer or sort of maybe even response to that.
Yeah, and one of the things you see that continuously happen then, if you keep inviting far right and extreme right parties to discuss these matters, you completely, like, they're constantly legitimized. Their fears and anxieties are constantly given a platform, constantly focus on, like, letting them speak about whether or not Black people in the Netherlands should be allowed to protest blackface, or whether or not racism is an issue or not. Like, all of these debates that are completely out of the question in other countries. The anti-Semitism that would absolutely not stand here in Germany is absolutely legal. Just are platformed and normalized as concerns that are then presented as very average Dutch concerns, very normalized, very general. Like, and the idea that you should be able to talk about all these things and ask all these questions is then used as a way to identify Dutch culture, right? So we constantly present ourselves as a country where you can say anything you want at all times, and where everyone should be allowed to do that, and where all opinions matter equally. But then if you look at these numbers, you see that some opinions matter way more, and that the left is constantly presented as, like, diverting from that norm, as not being normal, which is one of the highest values in Dutch cultures. It's the aspiration to be normal, to do normaal doen, is very, very big. And the left and more progressive views are constantly shown as not being normal. Activism, or simply the idea that racism is bad and not a topic for debate, is an opinion that in the Netherlands is seen as constricting.
Yeah, it's in itself racist talking about color, skin color.
Yes. Because, the Dutch see themselves as colorblind, and constantly will say it's not about race, but then also platform all these very, very racist and even fascist voices.
Yeah, because it's considered to be dialogue. If you can beat those extremist ideas on the marketplace of ideas, then you have a functioning democracy. But alas, that's not how it works.
Yeah, and then people who critique that are often painted as being angry, unreasonable, unwilling to cooperate, unwilling to polderen, as we mentioned before.
Another interesting feature, I think, of the Dutch media landscape is that the Netherlands is a country where it's, at least on the pundit level of things, it appears to me that the majority of pundits has convinced themselves, and also maybe the majority of the Netherlands, that the Netherlands is a left-wing country with a left-wing culture and a left-wing media environment and a left-wing politics and a left-wing university that simply needs to be challenged and kept in check a little bit. And so the majority of pundits lean right and have far more sympathetic things to say about the right than they have about the left, because they live in this illusion that really the mainstream, right, and the culture in the Netherlands is to the left. Even though this is not borne out by the numbers and by the facts at all, the Netherlands is culturally and politically a conservative country, a right-wing country. The majority of its pundits lean right, seem to be obsessed with these cultural issues, not with economic issues. But this illusion is remarkably robust and remarkably strong, and it feeds into this kind of perverse idea that, to be an interesting pundit in the Netherlands is to say, oh, well, isn't everything so left? I too am from the left, but I can see why we need an adjustment, a readjustment towards the right, because, that would bring some more balance, as if we don't have as if we haven't seen for the past 20 years a consistent rightward drift, a monopolization of all topics of discussion by the right, a complete obsession with questions about immigration and migrants and about their integration in Dutch society. And now, since recently, the Dutch right has simply imported the playbook of American conservatism with their culture wars, right? The Dutch right, even though this is not in fact a phenomenon at all in the Netherlands, is constantly talking about cancel culture, political correctness, campus culture, students, all these things, as if this is some kind of great menace in the Netherlands, not borne out with the facts, but who cares, right? And this is dominating too discourse in the Netherlands.
Definitely. And all the numbers show that our country has declined immensely under Rutte's rule. And yet he keeps getting the votes because these numbers, no one cares. And they're not heard. These other arguments are heard.
Exactly. And I think there's not just sympathy mainly for the far right and genuine concern for what the white, frustrated, angry men who vote for these parties might be feeling, but also fear simultaneously for those same people. Fear that if you do not represent them as much as you do, that they will escalate their politics. Yeah, they will be very upset.
Yeah. Well, and radicalize. There's this idea that as long as we keep talking with them, they don't move underground, and we can have a grip on them, and we can keep them from radicalizing. And it's completely oblivious to the fact how platforming them constantly is radicalizing our immediate
absolutely. There's this idea that they are, in fact, the white working class that has, been marginalized and has actually vanished from society, when that is very much not the case. But you can still see how whiteness dominates our media landscape by the assumption that these are the people, the white working class, apparently people, mainly middle class, who you should listen to, who form the baseline for Dutch politics.
And Dutch culture and society at large, right? There's this idea that they're the average Dutch person, that they represent them.
Exactly. Yeah, so what has happened on the left? Why do they not reach the same people, despite besides the issues in the media? Why do the Dutch left not reach as many people as they should?
No, I think that's a very good question, Pim, and maybe it's also something that I would want to emphasize a little bit, is that there are many trends that you see in other countries that are also
absolutely
present here in this country. So I think we should be linking these discussions as well to other developments happening elsewhere outside of the Netherlands. So when we talk, for instance, about why isn't the left capable of, addressing socioeconomic issues productively and being rewarded for that when people go to vote, is also because they have decided over the specifically last 20 years to, undervalue or not stress these issues anymore, because they have this understanding that their electorate is not interested in hearing the nuances regarding, immigration, regarding the integration of people in the Netherlands with a migrant background. And to them, what they actually are doing is looking to the far right and seeing that actually it rewards you if you flirt with the far right and with extremist discourses. So what you end up seeing is that the left has turned into, a political movement that is sort of very insecure, not capable of really setting an agenda, but only being very reactionary or ending up being reactionary. And I do think that one of the major struggles for the left will be in the future is to, really answer the question, what is it that we stand for? Are we really a political movement that wants to, find support, grassroots support, basically, from all Dutch people, regardless of their ethnic and cultural backgrounds? And if we want to do that, that means that we will have to address the issues differently. And luckily, we have a political party now in parliament that is actually, I'm very enthusiastic about them, because I do think that they might be offering such a political agenda and such a political view that might be very productive for the future, that is very inclusive and anti-racist and really addressing the structural problems that the country has, which is the political party Bijeen, which I think we could call a grassroots political party. And it's founded and led by Sylvana Simons, a Black feminist in the Netherlands, and who has, taken on her shoulder the massive task, I would say, to turn the left into the left again. And we will see what will happen. But I'm extremely positive and I'm extremely hopeful that, with all the work that she has done and people in her party have done over the last couple of years, because this is really, a movement that didn't start yesterday. They've been active for quite some time now. And I'm very glad that they were able to make it into parliament.
So they got one seat, but that one seat might still be quite valuable. I went to their election night party, which even though being in Berlin, thanks to COVID, I could participate at because it was online. And they are filled with energy, filled with hope. They really believe that the Netherlands could become a way more progressive, welcoming country than it is right now. And a few of the things they said when they were asked how they would use their seat if they would get it is that they want to influence, like Farah is saying, how the left is being the left. They want to push the left further left. They want to change the language that is used to discuss politics. So Sylvana Simons, for example, was talking about how she in Bijeen keeps talking about radical equality, and how she now heard other parties on the left use that phrase as well, which they have not done before. And we were discussing this before with this podcast, how terms like colonialism were never really uttered in the Netherlands, and they started talking about that constantly in Bijeen. And now a lot of other parties also refer to our colonial history in their election programs and are forced to reckon with that in some sort of way. And I think that is what Bijeen ultimately wants to do, is to put a lot of pressure on other parties to be more left-wing, more inclusive, more focused on questions of gender, class, race, disability, etc., and make the Netherlands stronger.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something that Farah was talking about how the left isn't really the left anymore in the Netherlands. And I think this has been especially true over the past 10 to 15 years, where parties like the Labour Party, right, the PvdA, have for years and years been talking about, well, maybe we got to emulate, for example, the Danish Social Democrats a little bit more, right, who decided pretty much that their path to electoral success was to be more racist to the Muslim population. Right. And these debates are still being had on the left. And in fact, I've already seen that, given the clobbering of the left in the last election, there's again the usual suspects, the pundits, the members of left-wing political parties that say, well, I guess we got to be more racist towards certain people now to win back this vote share. And so there is this meek attitude on the left that has been very pervasive over the past decade, or even longer, that, in order to stop the rightward drift of Dutch politics, the left itself has got to become more right-wing. So Bijeen is really bucking this trend and saying, no, what you need to do is actually become unapologetically and unequivocally on the left. You got to tell your own story. And I got to say, some parties have tried to also project that confidence a little bit more. The Green Party, I think, to their credit, had at least on the substance kind of side of things, had a decent campaign, even though they took a massive, massive hit. But it's just simply not enough. And this attitude on the Dutch left generally, that, we are small, we need to apologize for our existence even. The best thing we can achieve is maybe be invited into a center-right governing coalition and get some of our preferences done a little bit, is kind of this small attitude of, well, what we got to do is we got to present ourselves as serious parties that can govern, that aren't too far left, that are very palatable to a majority of the Dutch people. We got to signal that we also really care about these cultural issues that the right-wing parties care about. And as a result, they're not actually being rewarded; they're being punished because people will think, well, if this is the consensus, why don't I vote for the party that at least has pioneered this point of view for much longer, who are all on the right? Yeah.
I mean, why would you vote for the fake racist if you can vote for the genuine article?
Yeah.
And also, I think it's important to note that the newer leftist parties, like Bijeen or the animal rights party PVDD, they have actually made clear, by contrast, how flawed the understanding is of our society and our capitalism in our society by adopting a fully global leftist view. For example, the Animal Rights Party pioneered this idea, basically, that our consumption of meat, our bioindustry, has far-reaching consequences all around the globe, not solely because of, like unfair trade deals, but things like drought and food scarcity, all due to our the level of welfare we maintain in the West. And Bijeen has gone even a bit further on this issue, I think, by also incorporating anti-colonial and anti-racist policies and seeing the intersections between those here and abroad.
So there is this different sound, but it's very small because these two parties that you mentioned now, Pim, they have 7 seats in total out of 150 that we have at the moment. And I just wanted to add to what I said before, which, just to really hammer that thing home, is that I think there's this, as everyone here has talked about, this giant fear of polarization on the left. We don't want our society to polarize further. At the same time, we have that constant media attention to the extreme right, to the far right. So what you then get is a norm that is so far to the right and afraid to polarize that it allows fascists and racists to win the elections, and the left will still try to be polite to them and have coffee with them. And I think what these parties, like we've been talking about right now, that are a bit more farther to the left do, is that they do not fear that polarization, and they say, actually, if we're voting for racists and fascists, we have to polarize because we have to, as a people, say no, not in this country. And I think that is very hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet the majority of pundits is going to say in the Netherlands, and you can, the majority of pundits is going to say, oh, the downfall of the left, right? The beating of the left is all because of identity politics, right? And anyone from the United States understands the bugbear that this is. It's all the fault of identity politics, even though, the Socialist Party, which is a party that explicitly and in the campaign emphasized this, does not do quote unquote identity politics, right? Has distanced itself from what they call identity politics, took a beating,
a huge beating.
The Green Party, which doesn't really do what people think identity politics is, in fact, also took a huge beating. The PvdA, which the Labour Party, which also doesn't really do identity politics, didn't gain any seats, just stayed the same small size that they've been. So this analysis that somehow identity politics is to blame for the losses on the left is complete bullshit. And yet you're going to hear only this analysis, I guarantee it, in the Dutch public space over the next few weeks, because this again is where the pundits of the country are at, right? These right-leaning or right-sympathetic pundits who really just want to have a conversation with you about how people not want to be murdered in the street and being loud about it are to blame for the loss of the left. And it's maddening. Really, it is.
What you're saying, Thijs, I also think, because what we've heard a lot recently is that, for instance, this political party Bijeen addressing racism and institutional racism, that might be, an import coming from the United States. And if it wasn't for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I just want to say something real quick about, historical myths and what, Dutch people have, the stories that they've told themselves about what the Netherlands represents, and sort of primarily within that, the lack of engagement with the Dutch imperial presence and its ramifications for society nowadays. And also the idea that, Dutch people don't identify themselves with migrants at all. And this is all very well explained. And I just also want to use this opportunity for our international audience to tell them about a fascinating book. If you want to learn more about, the cultural archive of the Netherlands and the way in which, how we can sort of understand this notion of so-called white innocence, please read the book written by Gloria Wekker. The name of the book is White Innocence, and she talks about all these various Dutch paradoxes that actually resulted in Dutch people thinking about themselves as being colorblind and not engaging at all with, their colonial past. And Bijeen is really inspired by Gloria. She's actually on the voters list. So they are also aware of the importance of addressing these things more in public discourse.
So one of the most interesting things, I think, is the growth of these Democrat 66, who did have a campaign that was kind of focused on progressivism in a very window dressing way.
So these are the Lib Dems, right?
Yes, exactly. And they did kind of aim at feminism, anti-racism at some point, even though it's really empty. The fact that they won, however, must give us some hope, because I think there are people that want the Netherlands to be a progressive and more inclusive nation. And I think that the task for the left in the coming 4 years is to pull these people in, welcome them, and show them that we can do it differently.
All right, I think that's a good note maybe on Lot to finish on. Some optimism of the intellect in addition to some optimism of the will, because certainly we will have a lot of we will have a lot of work to do in the coming 4 years, and maybe if there's a good reason for this, we will do it again. We will again present for you an English language podcast, depending, of course, also whether you think this was a success. I hope you, dear listener, have a better sense of some of the issues that are currently going on in the Netherlands, about the nature and structure of our politics, and about the position of the left. Check the show notes, of course. Read up on those materials. Reach out to us. You can reach us on Twitter, which is @RedelijkeMidden. Not going to do that again. We're also on Instagram @RedelijkeMidden, or @HetRedelijk. Oh, you're not gonna email us. Who am I fooling? Just send smoke signals, homing pigeon, whatever. Yell at us. Try to reach us. Text us. And we hope to see you sometime again in the future. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Goodbye.
You.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Het Redelijke Midden. Het Redelijke Midden. De Boskast.